They told her the train had stopped at the wrong station, but no one could explain why a child was already waiting there like she'd been promised someone would arrive. And Clara Whitmore felt that promise the moment her boots touched the dry wooden platform, the heat rising in slow waves off the earth, the smell of dust and iron lingering in the air as the train hissed behind her and pulled away without a second glance, leaving her standing alone with a single suitcase, a sealed letter, and a future that suddenly felt misplaced by 30 miles of empty land. She adjusted the brim of her hat, scanning for the man who was supposed to meet her, the husband she had agreed to marry without ever seeing his face. But there was no one, only wind moving through broken fence posts and the faint creak of a loose sign swinging overhead. And then she noticed a girl, small, barefoot, standing no more than 10 feet away, watching her with a calm that didn't belong to children, dark hair falling over her shoulders, eyes steady, unblinking, like she had been waiting not for a train, but for Clara herself. The girl took a step forward, then another, until the distance between them disappeared, and without hesitation, without fear, she reached out and lightly touched the edge of Clara's dress, as if confirming something only she understood, and in a voice soft but certain, she said, "Mama," and the word landed heavier than the suitcase in Clara's hand, heavier than the miles she had traveled, heavier than the life she thought she was stepping into. Clara's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the worn leather handle as she shook her head slowly, instinctively, because there had to be some mistake. She had no child, no past here, no connection to this land or this girl. Yet the child didn't pull away, didn't question the denial, only looked up with the kind of quiet certainty that unsettled something deep in Clara's chest. A few men lingered near the far end of the platform, their voices low, eyes shifting between the girl and the newcomer, and one of them muttered something about trouble best left alone, about lines that shouldn't be crossed, but Clara barely heard them, her attention fixed on the small hand still holding her dress, on the way it felt less like a stranger's touch and more like something she had forgotten. She knelt slightly, lowering herself to meet the girl's gaze, her voice careful, almost fragile. "I think you've got the wrong person." But the girl only tilted her head, as if the idea itself made no sense, and tightened her grip just enough to be felt, not enough to hurt, just enough to say she wasn't letting go. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and something older, something that didn't belong to the town behind them. And from the shade near the hitching post, a man watched the scene unfold without stepping in, Ethan Caldwell, his posture still, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp, taking in details others missed, the way the girl stood, the way Clara hesitated, and most of all, the brief glint of silver beneath Clara's collar when the wind shifted her coat, a pendant that caught the light for just a second before disappearing again, matching the one resting against the girl's chest. Ethan's gaze narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition, as if a story he hadn't finished yet had suddenly found its way back to him, and somewhere beyond the low hills, beyond the reach of the station's silence, something was already moving, something that would not be stopped by distance or doubt, and Clara, still kneeling in the dust with a child who refused to be mistaken, felt it without understanding why, a quiet certainty pressing in around her, like the closing of a door she didn't remember opening. The men at the far end of the platform did not come closer, but their silence carried weight, the kind that pressed against a place without needing words, and Clara felt it as she slowly rose to her feet, the child's hand still holding her dress like it had always belonged there, like letting go was not an option anyone had offered. The train was gone now, the sound of its wheels fading into a thin line across the horizon, and with it went whatever plan Clara thought she had, leaving only heat, stillness, and the quiet presence of a girl who refused to doubt what she already believed. Clara glanced down again, her voice softer this time, almost unsure of itself. "Where are your parents?" But the girl did not answer the question, not directly. Instead, she turned her head slightly toward the hills beyond the station, where the land stretched wide and unbroken, her eyes narrowing just a fraction as if listening to something too far away for anyone else to hear. Then she looked back at Clara and said, "You came," as if that alone explained everything. The words settled in a way that made Clara's chest tighten, because there was no accusation in them, no confusion, only certainty, and certainty was harder to argue with than any mistake. Behind her, one of the men shifted his stance and spoke just loud enough to be heard, warning her that the child was not hers, that some things out here were better left untouched, that people who got involved often found themselves in places they could not easily leave, but Clara did not turn around. Not yet, because something in the child's grip, in the steadiness of her gaze, made the rest of the world feel less immediate, like noise carried on the wind. Ethan Caldwell finally moved then, stepping away from the hitching post with an unhurried pace, boots pressing into the dust with quiet certainty, his presence drawing a different kind of attention, one that made the men fall silent without being asked. And when he stopped a few feet away, he did not look at Clara first. He looked at the girl, taking in the details with a patience that suggested he had seen something like this before, though not exactly this. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "She does not look lost." And it was not a question, not really, more like a statement offered into the space between them. Clara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her fingers loosening slightly around the suitcase handle. "She is not mine," she said, but the words sounded thinner now, less certain than they had a moment ago. And Ethan's gaze shifted to her, steady, searching, not accusing, just measuring the truth behind what she said. The girl did not look at him, did not acknowledge him at all, her attention fixed entirely on Clara, as if the rest of the world existed only in the background, and slowly, almost without thinking, she lifted her other hand and placed it against Clara's wrist, just above the glove, her touch light but deliberate, and Clara felt it like a pulse, like something recognizing something else beneath the surface. The wind shifted again, stronger this time, lifting the edge of Clara's coat just enough for the silver pendant at her collar to catch the sun, and Ethan's eyes followed that brief flash of light, narrowing almost imperceptibly because he had seen that shape before, carved into memory years ago in a way he had never fully let go of. He did not speak of it, not yet, but something in his posture changed, a quiet alignment of pieces that had been waiting for a moment like this, and out beyond the low rise of land, where the sky met the earth in a thin, shimmering line, a faint movement stirred, too distant to be clear, but enough to suggest that this moment, small as it seemed, was not standing alone. It was being watched, carried, answered, and Clara, standing between a past she did not know and a future she had not chosen, felt the first hint that stepping off at the wrong place might not have been a mistake at all. The air did not move the same way anymore, as if something unseen had stepped closer without making a sound, and Clara felt it in the way her breath slowed, in the way her hand no longer tried to pull free from the child's grip, because somewhere between the words that had been spoken and the silence that followed, resistance had begun to feel less certain than staying. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, his boots grinding softly against the dry earth, and though his face remained unreadable, his eyes stayed fixed on the pendant at Clara's collar, waiting for another glimpse, another confirmation that memory was not playing tricks on him, because years ago, long before the land around them had grown quiet and empty, he had seen that same silver shape resting against someone else's skin, someone who had walked into his life and then out of it just as quietly, leaving behind only fragments and questions that never found answers. Clara noticed his gaze lingering and instinctively reached up, fingers brushing the chain at her throat, the pendant cool against her skin, something she had carried for as long as she could remember without ever knowing why it felt important, only that it did, only that she had never taken it off. The girl watched that movement closely, her eyes following Clara's hand, and for the first time, something shifted in her expression, not doubt, not fear, but recognition, deep and steady, as if a piece of a story had just fallen in a place exactly where it belonged. "You see," the girl said softly, not to Ethan, not to the men behind them, only to Clara, You came, and the words carried a quiet finality that made Clara's chest tighten again, because she had no answer for that, no explanation that could stand against the certainty in the child's voice. One of the men behind them stepped forward finally, his patience worn thin by what he could not understand, his tone sharper now, telling Clara that the child needed to be returned, that people from the hills did not leave their young without reason, that this was not her concern. But Ethan lifted a hand just slightly, not in warning, not in threat, just enough to pause the moment, and the man stopped speaking, as if something in Ethan's stillness made further words unnecessary. "She is not asking to be taken anywhere," Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying just enough weight to settle over the space, and Clara realized he was not speaking to the man. Not entirely. He was speaking to her, offering something that was not quite permission, not quite advice, but something in between, something that suggested this choice, whatever it was, would not be made by anyone else. Clara swallowed, her gaze dropping to the girl again, to the small hand still holding her, to the way it had not loosened once since that first moment, and slowly, almost without thinking, she shifted her suitcase to the other hand, freeing her wrist completely. And for a brief second, she hesitated, standing on the edge of a decision she did not understand, before turning her hand over and gently closing her fingers around the child's. The contact was light, uncertain, but it was enough, and the girl's shoulders relaxed just slightly, as if something long held in place had finally been allowed to settle. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying with it a distant rhythm, faint but steady, like hooves far beyond the ridge, and Ethan's head turned just enough to catch the sound, his expression tightening in a way that spoke of recognition, not fear, and Clara followed his gaze instinctively, though she could not yet see anything, only feel that. Whatever had been set in motion, the moment she stepped off that train was still moving, still drawing closer. And for the first time since she arrived, she understood one thing with quiet clarity: turning away now would not return her to the life she had planned, because that life had already begun to slip beyond reach the moment a child she had never met called her something she had never been. The sound carried clearer now, no longer something imagined, but something real, steady and measured, rising from beyond the low ridge like a heartbeat that did not belong to any one person, but to many moving as one. And Clara felt it before she fully heard it, a subtle vibration beneath her boots, a presence that turned the open land into something watchful. The men behind her shifted again, unease replacing their earlier confidence. Their voices quieter now, uncertain because whatever was coming was not theirs to control, and Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his posture unchanged but his awareness sharpened, like a man who had learned long ago that not every arrival needed to be met with force, only with understanding. Clara tightened her hold on the child's hand without realizing it, her pulse quickening, not from fear alone, but from the weight of not knowing what she had stepped into. And the girl, Lila, did not pull away, did not look toward the ridge, as if she already knew who was coming and had no reason to doubt it would end as it should. "We should go," one of the men muttered, backing a step away from the platform. And this time, no one argued, because the land itself seemed to be answering a question none of them had asked out loud. Clara glanced at Ethan, searching for something in his expression, some sign of what she was supposed to do, but he only met her gaze briefly, then looked down at the joined hands between her and the child. And for a moment, something softened there, something that did not belong to the present, but to a memory he had never quite buried. "If you leave now," he said quietly, "you will spend the rest of your life wondering why you were meant to be here." And he did not say it like a warning or even advice, just a simple truth offered without expectation. Clara swallowed, the words settling deeper than she expected, because she had spent months following a path chosen for her by ink on paper, by promises made in absence, and now, standing in a place she had not chosen, with a child she did not know, she felt something else for the first time, something that was not obligation, but something closer to choice. The wind shifted again, and this time the riders came into view, distant at first, silhouettes against the light, moving in quiet formation, not hurried, not aggressive, but deliberate, like a decision that had already been made long before this moment. Clara's breath caught as she watched them approach, her grip tightening again, and Lila finally turned her head toward the ridge, her expression unchanged, calm, certain, as if she was watching something familiar returning rather than something unknown arriving. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, not placing himself between Clara and the riders, but not leaving either, positioning himself in a way that acknowledged both sides without claiming either, and Clara understood then that whatever happened next would not be decided by words spoken too quickly or fear acted on too soon. The riders drew closer, their forms clearer now, their presence filling the empty space with a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. And as the first of them slowed at the edge of the platform, Clara felt the weight of every choice she had made, leading to this one moment, standing between the life she had planned and something she could not yet name, her hand still held by a child who had never doubted she would stay, and for the first time since. The train had left. Clara did not try to pull away. No one spoke when the first rider came to a stop, and that silence carried more meaning than any greeting could have, the horse shifting beneath him with a slow, controlled breath while dust settled around its hooves, and Clara felt the moment stretch thin, like something waiting to be understood rather than broken. The rider did not reach for anything, did not raise his voice. He simply looked, his gaze moving first to the child, then to Clara, and finally to the place where their hands were. Joined, and there it lingered, not with surprise, not with anger, but with something older, something that felt like recognition shaped over time rather than formed in an instant. Lila stepped half a pace forward, still holding Clara, her posture small but steady, and though she said nothing, something in the way she stood seemed to answer a question that had not been asked aloud, and the rider inclined his head just slightly. Emotion so restrained it might have been missed if Clara had not been watching so closely. Behind him, the other riders remained still, their presence forming a quiet line at the edge of the platform, not advancing, not retreating, simply there, as if the space between them and Clara belonged to a moment that needed no interruption. Clara swallowed, her throat dry, her thoughts moving slower now, more carefully, because nothing about this felt like danger in the way she had expected. It felt measured, deliberate, as though every movement carried weight that could not be rushed, and she became aware again of the pendant at her throat, the way it rested against her skin, suddenly heavier, suddenly more than just an object she had carried without question. The rider's gaze lifted to it, just for a second, then returned to her face, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, shaped by patience rather than urgency. "She chose you," he said, and the words settled into the air with a quiet certainty that echoed something Lila had already made clear. Clara blinked, the statement catching her off guard because it did not ask anything of her, it did not accuse, it did not demand, it simply stated something as fact, something already decided. "I do not understand," she said, her voice softer now. Not defensive, just honest, and the rider studied her for a moment longer before glancing at Ethan. A brief exchange passing between them without words, something that seemed to acknowledge a shared understanding neither felt the need to explain. Ethan shifted his stance slightly, his eyes moving once more to the pendant, then back to Clara, and for the first time there was something like confirmation in his expression, as if a memory he had carried quietly had finally found its place in the present. Lila's hand tightened again. A small movement, but enough to draw Clara's attention back down, and the girl looked up at her with the same unwavering certainty, as if nothing in the world had changed, as if this moment had always been meant to arrive exactly like this. The wind moved through the platform again, softer now, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and sun-warmed earth, and Clara felt something shift inside her. Not a sudden decision, not a clear understanding, but the slow, undeniable sense that whatever path she had thought she was following had already given way to something else, something she had not chosen, yet somehow could not turn away from. The rider inclined his head once more, this time not just to Lila, but to Clara as well, and though no one stepped forward, though no one reached out, the space between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like a line that had already been crossed the moment a child had spoken a single word and refused to take it back. Clara did not realize she had been holding her breath until it left her slowly, like something she had been waiting to release without knowing it, and the stillness that followed felt different now. Not empty, but full of something unspoken, something that seemed to exist between every person standing there without needing to be explained. The rider's words remained in her mind, simple and certain. She chose you, and Clara found herself turning that over quietly, because no one had ever chosen her before, not in a way that felt real, not in a way that carried weight beyond obligation or arrangement. And yet here was a child who had done exactly that without hesitation, without doubt, without even asking. Lila shifted closer, her shoulder brushing lightly against Clara's side, and the contact was small but grounding, as if she was reminding Clara that whatever this was, it was not something distant or abstract. It was here now, held in the space between them. Ethan stepped forward then, not enough to interrupt, just enough to be part of the moment, his voice low but clear. "The pendant," he said, and Clara's hand moved instinctively to her collar again, fingers curling around the chain as she looked at him, unsure of what he meant but sensing it mattered. He did not rush his words, did not press. He simply met her gaze and continued. "I have seen it before," and something in the way he said it made Clara's chest tighten, because it was not curiosity she heard, it was recognition, the kind that came from something remembered rather than discovered. The rider inclined his head slightly at that, as if acknowledging a piece of the same understanding, and for a moment, all three of them stood connected by something none of them had fully spoken aloud. It belonged to someone who came through here years ago, Ethan added quietly, his eyes not leaving Clara's. Someone who helped when help was not expected, and left without asking for anything in return. And Clara felt a faint unease stir within her. Not fear, but the strange pull of a story she had never been told but somehow seemed tied to. She shook her head slightly, her voice uncertain. "I have had this for as long as I can remember." And that was the truth, though it felt incomplete, like a sentence missing its beginning. Lila watched this exchange without confusion, without impatience, as if every piece was falling into place exactly as it should, and when Clara's hand loosened slightly on the pendant, the girl reached up and gently touched it, her fingers brushing the cool silver with a familiarity that sent a quiet shiver through Clara's chest. The rider's gaze softened, just barely, and he spoke again, not louder, but with a tone that carried more depth. "Some things are not given by chance," and though the words were simple, they settled into Clara with a weight that made them feel undeniable. Behind them, the men who had lingered earlier were gone now, their absence unnoticed until this moment, as if the space itself had decided who belonged in it and who did not, leaving only those who were part of whatever this was becoming. The sun shifted slightly overhead, casting longer shadows across the platform, and Clara became aware of how far she had traveled. Not just in miles, but in the quiet shift of something inside her, something that no longer reached back toward the life she had planned, but instead leaned forward into something unknown. Ethan glanced once more toward the horizon, then back to Clara and Lila, and for the first time, there was a hint of something like acceptance in his expression, as if he had been waiting for a moment like this without realizing it. And now that it had arrived, he was no longer standing apart from it. Clara looked down at Lila again, at the small hand still holding hers, and this time, she did not question it, did not try to understand it all at once. She simply let it be what it was, a connection that had chosen her before she had the chance to refuse. And as the wind moved softly through the open land once more, she felt something settle into place, not fully understood, not fully named, but steady enough to hold. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling over the platform like something deliberate, something that asked for patience rather than reaction, and Clara found herself standing in it without the urge to fill it, her hand still holding Lila's, her other resting lightly against the pendant at her collar, as if it might finally tell her what it had been waiting all these years to say. The rider shifted in his saddle just enough to ease his horse, the leather creaking softly, and though his eyes remained calm, there was a quiet expectation in them now, not directed at Clara alone, but the moment itself, as if something unfinished had reached the point where it could no longer remain unspoken. Ethan took a slow breath, his gaze drifting briefly toward the open land beyond before, returning to Clara, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something new, not just memory, but decision. There was a woman, he said, each word measured. She came through during a hard winter, when most would have turned back, and she stayed long enough to change things without asking for anything in return. And Clara listened, the words pulling at something just out of reach, something that felt like it belonged to her without her knowing why. Lila looked up at her again, her expression unchanged, but there was a quiet urgency in the way her fingers pressed more firmly into Clara's hand, as if she understood that this story, whatever it was, mattered now more than ever. She wore that same pendant. Ethan continued, his eyes flicking briefly to the silver resting against Clara's chest. Not as decoration, but as a promise, and Clara felt her breath catch again. Because the word promise settled differently than anything else had. It carried weight, purpose, something chosen, rather than given. She shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not remember any of that. And there was no denial in it, only confusion, only the quiet frustration of not knowing where she belonged in a story that seemed to be unfolding around her without her consent. The writer inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words without challenging them. And when he spoke, his tone was steady, almost reassuring. Not all promises are remembered, he said. Some are carried. And Clara felt that settled deeper than she expected, because it did not ask her to recall anything. It only asked her to recognize what she already held. The wind moved again, brushing against them with a softness that contrasted the tension of the moment. And in that brief shift, Clara felt something align, not in her mind, but somewhere quieter, somewhere that did not need explanation. Lila stepped closer then, closing the small space that remained between them, and gently, carefully, she placed her other hand over Clara's, covering it completely now, as if sealing something unspoken. And Clara did not pull away, did not question it. She simply let it happen, her fingers relaxing slightly. In response, Ethan watched this with a stillness that spoke of understanding rather than surprise, and for the first time, there was no distance in the way he stood, no separation between himself and what was happening, only a quiet presence that supported it without needing to guide it. The writer's gaze softened again, just for a moment, and he nodded once, a small gesture, but one that carried finality, as if a question had been answered without being asked aloud. Clara felt it then, the shift, subtle but undeniable, like a door opening not with force, but with quiet certainty, and though she still did not understand how she had come to stand here, why this child had chosen her, why this pendant mattered, she understood something else, something simpler, something stronger, that leaving now would not return her to anything she recognized. Because whatever she had been before had already begun to fade the moment Lila called her by a name she had never claimed. And for the first time, Clara did not try to deny it. She only stood there, holding the child's hand, and let the moment become real. The moment did not end. It shifted, like a quiet breath drawn deeper rather than released, and Clara felt it in the way the air seemed to settle around them. No longer uncertain, no longer waiting, but holding steady as if something had finally found where it belonged. The riders remained where they were, not moving closer, not pressing forward, their stillness carrying a kind of respect that Clara had not expected. And she realized then that they were not here to take anything, not to claim, not to demand, but to witness, to confirm what had already happened long before they arrived. Lila's hands remained wrapped around hers, small but unwavering. And for the first time, Clara noticed the warmth of that grip, not just the presence of it, but the comfort, the quiet assurance that did not ask questions or offer explanations, only existed. Ethan stepped a little closer, not enough to intrude, just enough that his presence felt like something solid at her side. And when he spoke, his voice carried a calm certainty that matched the stillness around them. Out here, things do. not always happen the way people plan, he said, and Clara let out a faint breath at that, because she had followed a plan all the way across states, across days of travel and miles of dust, only to arrive somewhere that did not match anything she had been told. And yet this place, this moment, felt more real than anything she had expected to find. She glanced down at Lila again, her voice softer now, less guarded. What if I am not who you think I am? And the question lingered between them, not as rejection, but as something honest, something fragile. Lila looked up at her without hesitation, her expression unchanged, her voice quiet but certain. You are here, and that was all. No explanation, no reasoning, just a simple truth that seemed to carry more weight than anything Clara could argue against. The rider inclined his head once more, a gesture that felt less like acknowledgement and more like agreement. And behind him, the others remained still, their presence no longer tense, no longer uncertain, but settled, as if whatever they had come to see had already been decided. Clara felt her shoulders lower slightly, the tension she had been carrying easing in a way she had not noticed until it began to fade, and she realized that the fear she had expected to feel never fully arrived, replaced instead by something quieter, something steadier, something that did not rush her to choose, but simply allowed her to stand where she was. The pendant at her collar shifted slightly, as the wind moved again, brushing against her skin, and this time she did not question it, did not search for its meaning. She only let it rest where it had always been, as if its purpose was no longer something she needed to understand, only something she needed to carry. Ethan's gaze moved from her to Lila and back again, and there was something in his expression now that had not been there before, not distance, not hesitation, but something closer to acceptance, as if the space between past and present had finally closed in a way he had not expected, but no longer resisted. Clara looked out toward the open land beyond the riders, the horizon stretching wide and endless, and for a moment, she imagined the path she had been meant to take continuing somewhere beyond that line, a life waiting for her in a place she had never seen. And then she looked back down at the child who had not let go of her hand once, and she understood something simple, something quiet, that the path she thought she had lost might never have been hers to begin with. The wind passed through once more, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and something older than both. And in that moment, Clara did not step back, did not turn away. She simply stood there, holding Lila's hands, and let the silence settle around them like something complete. The quiet did not feel empty anymore. It felt chosen, like every person standing there had stepped into the same moment without needing to be told why. And Clara felt that awareness settle deeper into her chest as she looked from Lila to the rider, and then to Ethan, realizing that no one was rushing her, no one was forcing an answer, and yet something inside her had already begun to answer on its own. The sun had climbed higher now, casting a warmer light across the platform, and the long shadows that had stretched between them earlier had softened, as if the distance they once marked no longer mattered. Lila's fingers shifted slightly in Clara's hands, not pulling, not urging, just present, and Clara noticed the way the child's grip had changed from holding on to simply being there, as if she no longer feared being left. That small change settled something unexpected inside Clara, something that felt less like confusion and more like recognition, though she still could not name it. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze moving once more toward the riders, then back to Clara, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something quietly resolved. Sometimes the land decides before we do, he said, and Clara let those words sit with her, because out here, far from cities and expectations, it felt possible that something larger than choice had guided her steps, not by force, but by quiet direction. She looked down at her suitcase then, still resting beside her boot, the leather worn from travel, the handle shaped by her grip over miles of uncertainty, and for the first time, it did not feel like something she needed to hold on to. Slowly, almost without thinking, she bent down and set it fully on the ground, releasing it completely, and the motion felt small but final, like placing one life aside without fully understanding what would take its place. Lila watched that movement closely, her eyes softening just slightly, and she stepped half a pace closer again, her shoulder brushing Clara's side. A quiet acknowledgement that did not need words. The rider noticed as well, his expression unchanged, but his posture easing in a way that suggested something had been confirmed, something that had not required a declaration, only a decision made without speaking it aloud. Behind him, the other riders remained still, but their presence no longer carried tension. It carried something closer to patience, as if they had come not to question, but to witness the moment Clara chose for herself. Clara lifted her gaze again, meeting the rider's eyes briefly, then Ethan's, and there was something different in her expression now. Not certainty, not complete understanding, but a willingness that had not been there before, a quiet acceptance of something she could not yet explain. Ethan held her gaze for a second longer, then gave the smallest nod. Not approval, not instruction, just recognition, as if he understood that whatever this was, it was no longer something she needed help deciding. The wind moved once more, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant hills, and Clara turned slightly toward it, feeling it brush against her face, and in that simple sensation, she felt something settle into place, not fully formed, but steady enough to stand on. When she looked back down at Lila, the girl was already watching her, as if she had known this moment would come, as if she had been waiting not for Clara to arrive, but for Clara to choose. And this time, when Clara gently tightened her hold on the child's hands, it was not out of uncertainty, it was not out of hesitation. It was a quiet answer, given without words, but strong enough to be understood by everyone standing there. The decision did not arrive like a sudden change. It unfolded quietly, the way the morning light had crept across the platform without anyone noticing the exact moment it shifted, and Clara stood there with Lila's hand in hers, feeling that same quiet certainty settle into her, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady enough that she no longer questioned whether it was real. The rider watched her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, not as approval, but as acknowledgement, as if the choice had always belonged to her, and he had only been waiting for her to see it for herself. Behind him, the others remained still, their presence no longer carrying expectation, only a calm patience that seemed to respect the space she had stepped into. Ethan shifted slightly beside her, his boots pressing into the dust, and when he spoke, his voice was softer now, less like an observation and more like something shared. Once you stop fighting what is in front of you, things tend to make more sense. And Clara let out a quiet breath at that, because she realized she had been resisting from the moment she stepped off that train, trying to hold on to something that no longer fit, something that had already slipped beyond reach without her noticing. She glanced once more at the suitcase resting on the ground, the life it represented suddenly feeling distant, like a story she had read rather than lived, and she did not reach for it again. Instead, she turned slightly toward the rider, her voice calm, not certain, but no longer unsure. What happens now? And the question did not come from fear. It came from readiness, from a place that had accepted that whatever came next would not be something she could plan the way she once had. The rider studied her for a moment, then looked down at Lila, and there was something like quiet understanding in that glance, something that passed between them without needing words. Before he spoke again, "Now you walk," he said simply, and the answer was so plain, so unadorned, that it took Clara a moment to realize how much it held, because it did not tell her where, it did not tell her how far, it only told her to begin. Lila's fingers tightened slightly at those words, and she turned her small body just enough to face the open land beyond the platform, her posture already aligned with a direction she did not need to question, and Clara felt the pull of it, not as pressure, but as invitation. Ethan watched the exchange quietly, his gaze moving between Clara and the horizon, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in him, no distance held back, only a quiet acceptance that whatever path was opening here, he was already part of it whether he had intended to be or not. Clara looked at him then, meeting his eyes, and something passed between them in that moment. Not spoken, not defined, but understood, A recognition that neither of them stood outside this anymore. The wind moved again, brushing past them with a softness that carried no warning, only motion, and Clara felt it at her back, like a gentle push rather than a force, and without thinking further, without searching for another answer, she took a step forward, her hand still holding Lila's, her feet. Leaving the place, she had arrived as if she had never truly belonged to it. The rider watched her move, his expression unchanged but settled, and behind him, the others remained still, not following, not stopping her, only witnessing as she crossed the invisible line between what she had been and what she was becoming. Ethan stepped forward a moment later, falling into pace without a word, his presence quiet but certain, and together, without ceremony, without declaration, they began to walk into a future that had not been planned, but had been waiting all the same. The ground felt different beneath her boots as they moved away from the platform, not because it had changed, but because she had, and Clara noticed it in the rhythm of her steps, slower at first, uncertain, then steadier as Lila walked beside her without hesitation, guiding without pulling, as if the path ahead did not need to be explained to be followed. The station faded behind them quickly, the worn wood and empty space shrinking into something smaller, something that no longer held her attention, and ahead, the land opened wide, stretching toward low hills that shimmered under the rising sun. The air warmer now, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant water. Ethan walked a few paces to her right, not too close, not too far, his presence quiet but constant, like a line drawn beside her that did not confine, only supported, and Clara found herself glancing at him once, then again, not out of doubt, but because there was something steady in the way he moved, something that made the unknown feel less sharp at the edges. Lila did not look back, not once. Her small step sure, her hand still wrapped in Clara's ass. If she had never expected anything else, and that certainty, that simple lack of hesitation, began to shape something inside Clara that she had not felt before, not even when she boarded the train with a plan and a promise, because this was not about where she was going, it was about who she was becoming with every step she took. The riders remained behind, their figures still visible for a time against the horizon, watching but not following, and Clara understood that they did not need to. Whatever they had come for had already happened, and now was hers to carry forward. The wind moved across the open land again, stronger now, lifting strands of Clara's hair beneath her hat, brushing against her face with a warmth that felt almost like encouragement, and she realized she was no longer bracing against it, no longer resisting the direction it came from. She was moving with it. "You do not have to understand it all at once," Ethan said quietly after a while, his voice breaking, the silence just enough to be heard without disturbing it. And Clara let those words settle, because they felt true in a way that did not require explanation. They gave her space to exist in the moment without forcing meaning where it had not yet formed. She nodded slightly, more to herself than to him, and her gaze drifted down to Lila again, to the way the girl's fingers had relaxed within hers, no longer holding on tightly, but simply resting there, as if trust had replaced the need to hold. Clara felt that shift deeply, because trust was something she had rarely been given without condition, and here it was offered freely, without question, without demand. The pendant at her collar moved, softly with each step, catching the light in brief flashes, and this time, Clara did not reach for it, did not question its presence. She let it be what it was, a part of her that no longer needed explanation to hold meaning. The hills drew closer slowly, their shape becoming more defined, and Clara realized that whatever waited beyond them was not something she needed to fear. Because fear had already lost its place in the moment she chose to walk forward. Ethan's pace matched hers naturally, not leading, not following, and for the first time, Clara felt that she was not stepping into something alone, even though no words had been spoken to define what they were to each other. The land stretched ahead, open and quiet, and with each step, Clara felt the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming grow wider, not in loss, but in quiet transformation, and though she still did not know where the path would lead, she no longer needed to, because for the first time since, she left everything behind. She was not searching for a destination. She was simply moving towards something that felt right. The hills rose slowly in front of them, not sharp or sudden, but steady, like something that had always been there waiting to be reached, and Clara felt each step carry more weight now. Not from doubt, but from the quiet realization that she was no longer passing through this land. She was entering it. The ground beneath her boots shifted from dry, flat dust to scattered stones and patches of stubborn grass, the kind that grew without asking permission, and Lila adjusted her steps easily, guiding without effort, her small hand still resting in Clara's as if it had never known anything else. Ethan slowed slightly as they approached the base of the first ridge, his gaze scanning ahead, not with concern, but with the careful awareness of someone who understood that what came next mattered, not in danger, but in meaning. Clara noticed the change in the air before she saw anything. Cooler, quieter, carrying a different scent now. Less of dust and more of earth that had held stories. Longer than any road she had traveled. Lila stopped then, not abruptly, but with intention, her steps coming to rest as she looked up at Clara. And for the first time since they began walking, there was something new in her expression, not uncertainty, but a question waiting to be answered. Clara felt it immediately, the shift, subtle but clear, and she knelt slightly without thinking, bringing herself closer to the girl's height, her hand still gently holding Lila's, and in that moment, everything around them seemed to pause, not in silence, but in attention. Lila reached up slowly, her fingers brushing once more against the pendant at Clara's collar. And this time, she did not just touch it. She held it lightly between her fingers, lifting it just enough for the light to catch its surface, and Clara watched as the silver glinted, revealing markings she had never truly noticed before, lines etched with purpose, not decoration, something deliberate, something meant. Ethan stepped closer then, his voice quieter than before, as if the land itself required it. That mark, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. It is not just a keepsake, and Clara felt a quiet tension rise in her chest. Not fear, but the sense that something long unanswered was finally about to be seen clearly. The wind stilled for a brief second, as if listening, and Lila looked up at Clara again, her voice soft but carrying a weight that felt far beyond her years. She gave it, she said, and Clara's breath caught. Because the words did not come as a guess. They came as memory, not hers, but carried through someone else. Who? Clara asked, her voice barely more than a breath, and Lila did not hesitate, did not look away. The one before you, she said, and the words settled into Clara with a quiet force that made everything else fall still. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to the horizon beyond the ridge, then back to Clara, and for the first time, there was no question left in his expression, only understanding, as if the missing piece had finally been placed. Clara looked down at the pendant again, at the marking she had never questioned, and something shifted inside her, not memory returning, but meaning forming, a connection she could not explain but could know. Longer deny. Lila's hand tightened slightly around hers again, and without another word, she turned and took a small step forward, toward the ridge, toward whatever waited beyond it. And this time Clara did not hesitate. She stood, her grip steady, her breath even, and she followed, not because she had been told to, not because she understood everything, but because something inside her had already decided that this was where she was meant to go. They reached the top of the ridge without realizing the exact moment the climb ended, because the path had not been marked by distance or effort, only by the quiet pull that had guided each step. And when Clara finally looked up, the land beyond opened wide in a way that took her breath not by force, but by stillness. A valley stretched beneath them, green in places where water ran unseen, scattered with small dwellings that seemed less built and more placed, as if they belonged to the earth, rather than stood against it. Lila stopped again, but this time there was no question in her posture, no pause waiting for permission, only a calm certainty that this was where they had been walking toward all along, and slowly, she released one of Clara's hands, not letting go completely, just enough to step slightly ahead, her small figure framed against the open land as she turned back, her eyes meeting Clara's with something softer now, something no longer asking, only welcoming. Clara felt it then, the full weight of the moment, not heavy in burden, but in meaning, because everything that had felt uncertain before had led to this quiet clarity, not of answers, but of belonging. And for the first time, she did not search for the life she had left behind. She did not wonder where the train would have taken her if she had stayed on it. She only stood there, feeling the wind move gently across her face, carrying the scent of water and earth, and something older than both, something that felt like memory, even if it was not her own. Ethan stepped up beside her, his presence steady, his gaze moving across the valley, and though he said nothing at first, there was something in the way he stood that mirrored what she felt, not surprise, not hesitation, but recognition, as if he had been standing at the edge of this moment long before she arrived. Clara's hand rose slowly to the pendant at her collar, her fingers brushing over the etched lines once more. And this time, she did not try to understand them. She only felt them, the weight, the purpose, the quiet promise they carried. And she realized that some things were not meant to be remembered through words. They were meant to be lived forward, carried into something new. Behind them, far in the distance, the station was no longer visible, not because it had disappeared, but because it no longer mattered. And Clara understood then that she had not lost her path when she stepped off that train. She had found the one that had been waiting for her all along, hidden not in distance, but in a single moment that changed everything. Lila took another small step forward, then another, her movement light, certain, and Clara felt the quiet invitation in it, not a pull, not a demand, just a simple truth that the next step was hers to take. Ethan glanced at her once, just briefly, and gave the smallest nod, not guiding, not leading, only standing beside her as she chose, and Clara breathed in slowly, letting the moment settle fully, before she stepped forward again, following the child, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because something inside her had already chosen this without needing explanation. The valley waited, open and still, and as they began to walk down into it, no one spoke, no one rushed, the world around them moving in quiet harmony with the path they had taken. And in that silence, there was no need for words, because everything that mattered had already been said in the way a child had reached out, in the way a woman had stayed, and in the way a man had chosen to walk beside them without asking why. And as the wind carried softly across the land, it left behind a truth that did not need to be spoken aloud. Out here, belonging was not something you were given. It was something you stepped into, one quiet step at a time.